All right, for those of you just joining us, welcome. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. Today's webinar is being recorded for anybody who may have had coworkers unable to attend live, and then we'll be posting it on our YouTube channel later this week. Everybody will be muted during the presentation to help minimize background noise, and then we'll open things up for questions towards the end. That said, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat at any time during the presentation, and we'll do our best to address as many of those as we come towards the end. With that, I will pass it over to our speakers today, TJ and Max.
Welcome, everyone. I love the age of AI because it would have taken me probably hundreds of dollars to get a graphic like this built. And instead, I just put a simple prompt into AI, and we get this beautiful graphic that looks nothing like the electric grid. But close enough. So we're going to do some introductions here, starting with Max.
All right. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Max Carpenter. I've been with GridSme almost a year, started in the spring of last year. Actually, thanks to TJ, he referred me into the organization. We formerly worked together at Southern California Edison. I have 27 years in the business, mostly in senior leadership roles around trading and market operations. Mostly in the California ISO, but also more recently SPP, ERCOT, PJM, MISO, in both trading as well as generation dispatch, renewable integration, market protocols, and so forth across all those. So moved out to Colorado in 2019 after 10 years with Edison. Worked for a wholesale energy provider called Guzman Energy, which has a very unique portfolio that actually crosses all three markets that we're going to be talking about two of. Another one that won't be talked about today is the RTO expansion of SPP. But yes, also Markets Plus and EDAM. So, and I'll let TJ take it from there.
Thanks, Max. So my name is TJ Ferreira. I have 28 years of experience in the industry, starting back in 1998 when I graduated from high school. Went straight into working at a small little utility called Northern California Power Agency, which, surprise, surprise, is in Northern California. And that's where I met Lonnie Rush, who's one of the founders of GridSme, and he's the one that brought me on board here at GridSme. And I think I saw him jump into this chat, so he gets to see what I'm doing 28 years later from when we first met. From NCPA, I went to Silicon Valley Power, and then to the California ISO, and to the Southern California Edison, where I met Max. And then after leaving Edison, I went into consulting with GridSme, and I am now a power trader at NV Energy. So I must say that anything that I say today has no relation whatsoever to NV Energy. This is purely as a guest host here at GridSme. My background is in technology and market operations, and I'll be covering some of the EDAM stuff here today, while Max will cover the SPP Markets Plus stuff. And then we'll take your guys' questions. So I always like to start by giving just a quick rundown for people who are new, completely new to the subject, how we even got to this whole concept of energy markets, and where we are in this evolution here. And so I usually start with PURPA back in the 70s. So there was the original energy crisis of the 70s, the oil crisis. And as a result of that, some people started making moves to have the concept of independent power producers. And that resulted with the PURPA filings in Congress. Things like qualified facilities and such came about. And that really kind of started this movement toward from the vertically integrated utility model that we had to something that allowed open access and markets to evolve. And so in the 1990s, I think 96 to be exact, you had FERC orders 888 and 889. Those were the two orders that truly opened access to the markets and made it possible for these markets to form across the United States. The California version of that market, the California ISO, went live April 1st, 1998. And along at the same time, there was the Power Exchange, the PX, in California as well. During the early 2000s, late 1990s, there was the second energy crisis, and this was in California. This is where you had things like rolling blackouts, and we ended up with Governor Schwarzenegger as a result of that. And during that time, the Power Exchange went defunct, and these were due to flaws in the market design, flaws that were known. They weren't unknown. They just felt that they had more time to fix them. People were exploiting those flaws earlier than they had expected. In particular, zonal versus nodal markets, so having a lot less granularity on how they view congestion in the transmission system caused a number of problems. And so a project was started, MRTU, a market redesign technology upgrade, and that project, in some respects, started in the 2000 timeframe, did not go live until 2009. It was about a 9-year project. At the very beginning, it was called MD02, Market Design 02, because it was supposed to go live in 2002. I think it was about 2004 that they renamed it to MRTU. And that's the current market that you see in the California ISO. It's had a few upgrades here and there since then, but that's the market that's running in California to this day. And then in 2014, the California ISO expanded the real-time version of that market into the west of the western United States. That was called the Energy Imbalance Market, or the WEIM, Western Energy Imbalance Market. And this is where market participants can offer up their services or offer up their generation in real time to help solve imbalances in their area and other areas. And that then led to what we're going to be talking about today, which is the EDAM, the Extended Day Ahead Market. This is going live this year. It's in the process right now of being implemented. And this is taking that same concept of extending the real-time market out to the other states and extending instead the day-ahead market as well. And so that's kind of the history, well, 50-year history of how we got from the energy crisis in the 70s to where we're at today. These are just some key concepts of what it means to have an energy market. So the first thing I always like to point out is energy is a traded commodity. However, it's different from any other traded commodity that's out there because it is simultaneously produced and consumed. Even if you talk about battery storage, that's a consumption of energy at one point and a production of energy at another point. And so there is a little bit of time shifting capability with storage. But for the most part, this is instantaneously consumed and produced. That makes it different from any other commodity out there, and definitely has challenges associated with it. In particular, you need to instantly balance these things. You can't have an open book per se. You're constantly making sure down to every 4 seconds, pulsing generators up and down in order to make them match that load and demand that's showing up. One of the key concepts that exist in these markets is the concept of transmission limits. So usually what we're trying to solve for is congestion on those transmission lines. You can think of it as traffic on a freeway. There's just so much room for cars to get down that freeway, and there's just so much room for those electrons to get down the wire. And if there is a path that's very popular for those electrons to flow on, that can cause congestion. And so we want to make sure that we're dispatching resources, the energy resources, in a way that they are close enough to the demand that they're not going to overburden the transmission grid. And because the entire Western United States, everything west of the Rockies, is one grid, it's the Western interconnection, anything that you do at any part of that grid can affect any other part of that grid. And so when California was running just its own market, it only had limited visibility as to what was going on outside of California. Now with the Western EIM, it can see a lot more information, and it can help optimize a lot more of that transmission grid in the Western United States. This concept of independent utilities, as I said, this started back in kind of that PURPA era. We do want to have open access, and we want to make sure that the individual balancing authorities and other states that are participating in this still have their own independence and can manage their grid the way they want, but can use the diverse nature of the rest of the grid in real time and going forward in day ahead in order to solve those energy imbalances. And so it's a mixture of staying independent as well as being in a co-optimized relationship with your neighbors. The market optimization does just that. It is the least cost combination of resources while respecting grid constraints. And so the goal here is to find where the cheap energy is or the less congestion-based energy and use that across the entire grid. And the day ahead versus real time, right now it's just real time. We're going to the day ahead. That's the concept of EDAM. And last but not least, the renewable variability. So just in California alone, if you are in the Los Angeles or Southern California area, Los Angeles area versus Northern California, San Francisco area, there is a 30-minute difference between sunset just inside that state. And if you cross the entire Western grid, there's up to a 2-hour difference of when sunrise and sunset occurs in that grid. And so when you're looking at just solar power in general, solar can start to help the western part of the grid earlier in the morning by taking advantage of that sunrise that's happening on the eastern part of the grid. And likewise, the western part of the grid can help the eastern part of the grid by having that later sunset. And so this variability of just the sun itself is very valuable to take advantage of that entire grid. Likewise, the wind doesn't always blow in the same area at the same time, and sometimes it can be windy in one area where there's wind turbines, but not another. And having that renewable variability across the entire grid helps to make it less variable and a more reliable product going forward, and reduces our need to have coal and natural gas and some of the other resources in the Western United States. And so those are the basic concept of the grids in general here. When it comes to EDAM, it's important to know the different entities that are going to be participating in the market. And so we always like to start with the load serving entities. They're going to forecast that demand that they have, whether it's for the next 5 minutes, the next hour, the next day, the next week. They're putting out forecasts on a regular basis, trying to determine exactly how much demand they think they're going to need and how much the energy they're going to need to procure. The generators on the grid, they're going to submit offers and offer their power into that market. They're going to figure out what price makes sense for them to turn on for a commitment purpose or get dispatched up and down for an economic dispatch purpose. The transmission operators need to define the limits. They're the ones that are telling you what these transmission lines are good for at any given time, and whether or not there's special constraints, special voltage needs or anything going on where some generator may be in a must-run situation in order to support transmission lines that are behaving differently than normal. The balancing authorities, they're there to maintain reliability. They also submit schedules for those market participants who aren't participating in the market, they'll submit those schedules into the market so the market has a full picture of what's happening in that BA. And then last but not least are the scheduling coordinators as far as the inputs go. The scheduling coordinators is the legal entity of who interacts with the California ISO markets, whether it be the ISO itself, the Western EIM, or EDAM. They're submitting those supply and demand bids and schedules, and they're going to be the ones that are doing the interactions with the actual the software that the ISO provides. As the market operator, the ISO is then going to go ahead and optimize that day-ahead market as well as the real-time market when it comes to EIM. And in that process, they are going to be creating binding and advisory commitments for those resources. That's going to tell them which resources are going to turn online and when over the 24 hours of the next day. And then they'll also create prices, which are locational marginal prices, or LMPs, for all the nodes that exist in the grid. Those two things are the outputs of the market, and that's how they present to the market what they think the plan will look like for the next day. So in the orange box here is what we're adding with EDAM. Outside of the orange box is what we currently have. So on the left-hand side, we've got the long-term planning, resource adequacy programs. This is whatever long-term planning mechanism your balancing authority currently recognizes, that stays going forward. So in the California ISO, they have the CPUC resource adequacy program or equivalents for that aren't CPUC jurisdictional. In the Western United States, and Max is going to talk about RAP a little bit later, there's a Western version of that resource adequacy program. But each state and each PUC may have a different way of looking at what it means to be resource adequate. Those rules stay in place. The EDAM doesn't change those whatsoever. EDAM just relies on you to go through that process and show up with enough resources. So that stays the same. Likewise, everything to the right of the orange box also stays the same. In real time, there's still going to be a resource efficiency test to see that you are bringing enough resources and that they're committed and ready to be dispatched. And then the EIM is still going to clear and dispatch every 5 minutes. The new things in the middle are the day ahead prep, which is the resource efficiency evaluation. This starts at 6 each morning and goes till 9. There's multiple checks. I think it's every half an hour to make sure that the plan that you are presenting to the market is going to be sufficient to cover all of the load that is expected for the next day. And if not, you'll get information back and you have time to revise it. The last run, which is the binding run of the resource efficiency evaluation, does happen when the market closes at 10. And that's where we determine whether or not this particular BA has shown up with all the resources they need to. And so it's kind of like a check on the RA program. Whatever resource adequacy program your BA has put in place, it should make sure that you have enough resources in that day ahead time frame to meet your expected demand. Then the market's going to clear and it produces energy awards. Energy only awards are going to come out of EDAM. And there is the concept of flex capacity and ramping capacity and things along those nature. Those are not products that will be procured in EDAM, but they are concepts that go into the evaluations and tests. So when they're looking for sufficiency, they're not just looking for energy sufficiency, but they are looking for enough reserves, enough flexing, enough flex, and enough ramping capability to meet the full demand. And so that's how the ISO addresses the ancillary services and flexibility concept in the market, is they're looking at that during the sufficiency test, but it's not part of the actual procurement that they're going to do. And when it comes to sufficiency, any generation that you have committed counts, any imports that are on firm transmission count, storage resources, demand response that's been in, anything along those lines you can use in order to meet those sufficiency tests. And I think really here it's kind of three views at the same concept of, are we going to have what we need and when we need it? RA is looking months and years in advance. The RSE is looking the next day in advance, and the RST is looking at this next hour and the next 15 minutes and the next 5 minutes. So that's kind of the flow through the system there. Just looking at the day in the life of an EDAM, you've got a lot of those inputs of the market happening, those forecasts from 5 to 9 a.m. 10 a.m. is when that bid submission deadline is going to occur. That's when all the bids need to be in for that day ahead market. And then there's a 3-hour window from 10 to 1 p.m. where the ISO is running the market. Generally, they have to run it more than once, and so it has to cycle through a number of times in order to come up with some results. Those results are published at 1 p.m. each day. And those will always, it's a 7-day-a-week market. It's always for the next day. And those, so those energy results and the prices will be published. The market then reviews those schedules and creates e-tags and does all of the scheduling process that needs to occur that afternoon. And then we go straight into the real-time market is opened at that point. People can start to submit bids for the real-time market, and we get into that actual day at midnight. And then it's the EIM as we're currently doing every 15 minutes, every 5 minutes, every hour, and so on. And then I believe this is my last slide for EDAM here, and this is just covering how settlements occurs. So when the market clears, you have 24 or 25 hours of market results, depending on if it's the daylight savings day. And those results are financially binding at that point. And so you will get paid or have to pay for energy of your energy award times the LMP at that location. And then those become the starting point. What's currently used as base schedules in the EIM market, your day ahead awards basically become your base schedules, and your real-time awards and your real-time settlement are based off of the deviation of those. From those market results that are published, not just the generation and load is going to pay, but also the congestion revenues, your CRRs and any transmission payments are going to occur from those as well. And then we just roll right into the operating day and pick up right where EIM currently exists. And then last but not least is the neutrality adjustments. These are the things that the ISO market is always neutral in payments. Anything it takes in goes out one way or another. And so there's a handful of settlement charge codes that are meant to allocate those extra charges to whoever they need to, and in some cases just kind of peanut buttering it to the load in a sense. I think that's it. We'll continue on now to the next section, and Max gets to a bit here.
Okay, thanks, TJ. Yeah, so very similar concepts you'll find with SPP Markets Plus. It is a day-ahead market, very much like EDAM. Similar concepts, similar acronyms. I'll go through here rather quickly. Let's talk about what it isn't. It is not a fully integrated market. It is in the way that we know the RTOs, where there's transmission planning, a centralized open access tariff. Those concepts of transmission planning and allocation do not apply here. Ancillary services do not apply. I believe that's the case also for EDAM. Those will still be procured and run by the respective balancing authorities. And think about, the Western Interconnect. Really, there's some, I think, 38 balancing authorities across the Western Interconnect. And what the day-ahead market is doing is just a more efficient version of what's already been done, almost back to that earlier slide that TJ was showing. When FERC allowed open access through Order 888, balancing authorities and transmission providers were trading with each other based on seasonal needs. What a centralized day-ahead market does is it just creates a more efficient a more efficient view across all of those different participating balancing authorities for both loads, resources, and transmission. A lot of transmission gets underutilized in the bilateral West, excuse me. And so the transmission provider, the market operator, in this case SPP, is more efficiently dispatching based on that centralized view. So some of the key concepts in the SPP Markets Plus, TJ mentioned RAP participation is a requirement. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There will be a day-ahead market, a RUC market, as well as an real-time market. RUC stands for Reliability Unit Commitment. It is very similar to the RUC concept that for those of you that are familiar with California ISO, with some notable differences, obviously, with SPP. The products are Energy and FlexRamp. FlexRamp is not an ancillary service. It is an economic model. I think I tend to explain FlexRamp as well as RUC is kind of bridge products, bridge markets between day-ahead and real-time to ease the transition, since most of these areas are going to be highly have net load variance due to intermittent supply from wind and solar. The RUC and the FlexRamp provide a mechanism for the market operator to ensure sufficient flexible ramping capacity is available to the market to optimize around. Transmission rights, there is an opt-out. I think this is a key difference between EDAM, at least the way I understand it today. The 15th of the month preceding the operating month, a point-to-point or network customer can opt out their transmission or certain transmission rights ownership from the market. However, if they do that, they will not be eligible for congestion rents. Congestion rents are basically paid out to transmission right holders, both network and point-to-point, based on the implied congestion between the injection and the withdrawal points at those nodal prices, the marginal congestion of those prices. So you would do that only in the instance where you have a bilateral obligation or export obligation out of the market. So Markets Plus in a nutshell, obviously market participants and market operators are the key players in this. The market participants are both the balancing authorities and transmission providers, as well as the entities serving loads and owning generation within that footprint. And really, when you think about a day-ahead market, it's really just expanding the energy imbalance. TJ also mentioned that the EIM, which we know from CAISO, has been around since 2014. A lot of folks outside of the Rockies might not know it, but SPP has been running a similar construct in the Colorado region and parts of Wyoming and New Mexico called Western Energy Imbalance Service, or WEIS, since 2021. And really just the day ahead is just expanding that, again, broader geographic scope, as well as a 24-hour planning horizon versus an intra-hour market for energy imbalance. So we'll go to the next slide. The market features are basically the same as what TJ mentioned: locational marginal pricing. There'll be a flex market clearing price, MCP, for that flexible product that will be available, as well as marginal GHG cost. There are a number of participants have GHG requirements or tracking requirements that this market construct will capture and track appropriately. In addition, I already mentioned that the products that will be procured: Energy and FlexRamp, Flex Up and Flex Down. And then there'll be a market monitoring component, which is very typical for any organized market, to ensure there are no abusive practices from market participants improving market efficiency, and of course, it would be independent from the market operator. The Western Resource Adequacy Program, I'll talk in a little more detail about, but again, it is a prerequisite to joining the EDAM market, joining the Markets Plus market. And I think of that as it's kind of similar to the resource sufficiency that TJ mentioned for EDAM, but where they're doing resource efficiency day ahead, the resource adequacy has a forward showing, which is 7 months in advance. And it has a must-offer obligation, very similar to what you might be familiar with in the California RA markets or other RA markets. It is not a capacity market, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And basically, this is designed to accommodate variable energy resources with persistence forecast and the flexible ramping products. Next slide. So getting into the pre-market activities, kind of walking through how this will work. Obviously, market participants need to get registered. They need to register their assets, both loads and resources. The opt-out that I mentioned, if you have an existing bilateral obligation that's wheeling out or through the market, you have the ability to opt out of the market, but you would forego the congestion rents concept. The market modeling has two basic key elements: the network modeling, which is the actual physical representation of the grid, the nodes, the market settlement locations. And then the right is a concept basically of the commercial model, how the financial relationships are mapped. A market participant is the ultimate financial responsible entity that the market SPP looks to. But they could have a number of different asset owner subcategories, which are groupings of load and generation across their footprint. Next slide. So in the day ahead, very similar time frame. It is in Pacific Prevailing Time. Deadline to submit bids for day ahead is 10. I think that's the same as EDAM. A little bit later on the market results. The overall goal, again, is to minimize production costs and provide a price transparency and assurance to market participants ahead of real time. Moving ahead to the RUC component, there are two elements of RUC. 2.5 hours after the market closes, the day ahead reliability unit commitment will run. Again, think of it as a bridge gap between the day ahead market and real time. RUC is really SPP having a forecast and comparing it to market results. And if market results are significantly different than what they're actually forecasting from gen and load in the territory, RUC allows them to go and backstop that so that there isn't any major surprises going into real time. And then there'll be a 4-hour RUC intraday that the SPP will also be running, again, to bridge that gap, to make sure that as renewables are changing, forecasts for loads are changing, transmission outages, so on and so forth, all those things change as you roll into real time. This is designed to accommodate those changes and ease the transition into real time. Next slide. And by the way, quick disclaimer, you'll notice the very mundane graphics in my part of the presentation compared to TJ's. His technological prowess is on display. Mine is, my lack thereof is also on display. So pretty boring stuff. I apologize, but hopefully the intent is still being conveyed. So now after RUC, we roll into the real-time balancing market. Really, again, like the energy imbalance markets we know today, it's optimizing 5-minute intervals. And it's really just handling the deviations from what the day-ahead market is. From what the day-ahead market expected, I should say. And again, still the same goal of minimizing production costs, running every 5 minutes, a variety of inputs you can see on the left feeding into the RTBM, with the outputs being dispatch instructions, flex reserve, GHG, and real-time prices. Next slide. And then the settlements. The settlements is the core part of any organized markets. You have to know and settle the dollars as much as where the megawatts are going. The concepts are pretty straightforward if you're familiar with organized markets today. Day-ahead market is day-ahead quantity times price. Real time is just the deviation, real time quantity minus day ahead quantity times the real time price. So that really the delta that you saw between what you planned for in day ahead and what actually happened in real time. The market has 3 different settlement intervals, one S7, 7 days after the operating day, S53, and S120. You'll get an invoice that will include all 3 of those as you roll through time, and have the ability to dispute based on those timetables. Again, the energy products, there'll be energy flex reserve component, congestion rents if applicable, and make whole payments for any resource that was dispatched out of merit or out of order or was supplementally dispatched through RUC. There'll be a make whole payment, which is basically handled through the neutrality uplift. Again, as TJ was saying, similar concept. The SPP, as the market operator, needs to maintain revenue neutrality. So any money they collect from a market participant will be sent back out with a small amount for administrative fees to run the market. Okay, so resource adequacy. This is a big topic. The West has, with the exception of California, lacked a forward planning market. The Western Power Pool, formerly the Northwest Power Pool, has been working on this for years. If you are familiar with the SPP integrated market, you will find a lot of the concepts are very similar to the attachment AA program of the integrated market. It's similar but different, but I think it's more closely related to the SPP RA market than you will find it to the California. Governance will be the WPP is still the program admin. SPP will be the program operator. There will be an independent board and participant committees to make key decisions around how the market rules evolve. There's a forward planning assessment where the planning reserve margins are determined, the capacity critical hours, the 4 hours that are most critical to maintaining the grid stability. ELCC is a concept you might be familiar with, applied to most intermittents, effective load carrying capability for both solar and wind, as well as batteries, and then a UCAP capacity accreditation for thermal resources. After the planning phase, we move into the forward showing phase, which is 7 months ahead of each planning season. Summer and winter. Summer is June through September. Winter is November through March. It's a bilateral market. So even though the forward planning and the forward showing create the obligation, the actual procurement of capacity is up to market participants to be done bilaterally. That is different from, say, PJM, if you're familiar with the East Coast markets, where they actually centrally clear everything. It's kind of a one-stop shop. This is done to kind of honor the process that the West has been largely bilateral. And you can use a variety of different financial and PPAs to meet that obligation. There is a cure period after the showing to allow entities time to fill any deficiency. And if they are deficient, it is tied to a multiplier of the cone. I think the current cone for the RAP as approved is around $95 a kW year. It's $95,000 a megawatt year, and it escalates depending on the overall position of the market. There is also an operation phase, 6 days in advance, and this is the functional difference. EDAM uses resource sufficiency, and as I understand it, balancing authorities that don't meet that sufficiency are locked out of the optimization. So they're only optimized within their footprint if they are not resource sufficient. That's to prevent market participants from continuing to lean on their neighbors without bringing enough of their own resources to the party. Western Resource, the RAP program accommodates that through both the forward showing and the operations phase, requiring a must offer, and it will be adjusted for intermittent renewables having a different ambient conditions, so on and so forth. Solar and wind will be adjusted. Their must offer will be adjusted by those conditions as you roll into that day ahead time frame. All right. I think that's next slide. So I think with that, yeah, I'll give it back to TJ.
Yeah, so that's kind of the overview of the two different markets. And, let's pause for a second and just marvel at the fact that did any of us ever think we were going to get to the point where, as a balancing authority in the Western United States, you have two markets to choose from that you get to join? Like, which of these makes the most sense for what I'm going to do and how am I going to participate? I never thought we would get there, and it's almost as amazing as the AI graphics I had at the beginning, but those might be a little bit more amazing. I'm not sure. So, speaking of the choice that has to be made, at some point, different groups need to make a choice between these two markets. And so, at a very high level, we just created a comparison slide here to show some of the key differences. A lot of what we talked about so far there wasn't much difference at all. There's a lot of similarity between the two markets. Entities have been building markets now for 20 plus years. We've learned what the best practices are, and a lot of those are being integrated into both of these markets. So at the core, the EDAM market, of course, is going to be based off of WEIM, the ISO product, and the Markets Plus is going to be based off of the WEIS, the SPP product. So that's one major difference between the two. When it comes to kind of that reliability component, the EDAM is going to do it through sufficiency tests. The SPP markets are going to do it through the RA and flexibility reserve product that they have. Launch timeline, EDAM is going live right now in 2026. And Markets Plus is targeted for the end of next year, 2027. Governance model, I know that this is an important aspect for a number of people making this decision. When it comes to EDAM, the ISO board is partially involved in what happens with EDAM because it does use that day-ahead market, and that day-ahead market is still under the ISO board. That ISO board is appointed by the California governor, and so some people do have hesitation around that. On the SPP market side, it is an independent board, and it is a very stakeholder-driven process. And then GHG tracking. Right now, EDAM has FERC-approved GHG tracking, and the Markets Plus, last I checked, it was still conceptual. They were working towards that. And so those are at a high level some of the differences. There are a lot of course, nuances between the two, but these are the ones that usually are driving the decisions that we're seeing in the market these days.
I will say before we move on is, when you mentioned at the beginning there, TJ, I would have thought that participation was largely driven by proximity. But what I'm finding and what you're seeing as far as participation, you have like the Arizona utilities have decided or announced plans to join the Markets Plus. And I was surprised when that first came out because I thought, well, Arizona has been one of the biggest recipients and beneficiaries of the EIM market since 2014. If you look at the quarterly statements that go out, but in recent months and years, that amount has dwindled. And I thought, well, I was curious, why would they join Markets Plus? And one of their documents, it's a public document, I can find it. They talked about supply diversity, and they had, as they built out their solar portfolio, they started to look a lot more like Southern California, and so the benefits started to dwindle a little bit. Whereas the SPP market, particularly the Colorado participants, are wind heavy, high capacity factors, and so that supply diversity made a lot of sense. And that was something that kind of surprised me when I learned that detail is, it's not just proximity, it's not just interchange capacity, but how do they complement? How does one region complement another from a supply and load diversity standpoint?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so leaving you with a couple concepts, at least to think about for those of you that are in or will be in the participating markets. And, that is that list is a lot of BPA, and a lot of the entities within BPA have announced intent to join Markets Plus. I mentioned the Arizona utilities, a number of I'm here in Denver, Colorado. The local utility public service of Colorado has announced plans to join Markets Plus. There are a number of questions to be answered and thought about: market participation versus asset ownership. How do you register? What is a DEVR versus an NDEVR? A couple new acronyms to throw out there: non-conforming loads. How to model storage. Batteries are a big part of the supply equation today, and California has seen an enormous amount added to their system. I think over 16 gigawatts. That's happening now across the West. What participation models does SPP have? What if you have an existing obligation? How would that be handled? We mentioned the opt-out option and what that means. And then the wrap market. What does it mean to your resource from a qualified capacity and must offer obligation? The planning reserve margins and cone deficiency charges. So just some things to think about as you head into that. And we, of course, TJ and I and a number of others at GridSme are happy to help. Phone call away to answer some of those questions that might be on your mind.
Speaking of which, oh man, we hit that perfectly. We wanted to take 45 minutes and leave 15 for questions, and look at that time. Good job. Now it's time for questions.
I think one of the first ones there was in the chat from Mark. Asked, will EDAM also procure ancillaries? And I think the answer is no, because the open access transmission tariff still is in place. It's not being consolidated the way you see in RTO. But TJ, you want to take that one? I assume reg up, reg down, spin, non-spin, all that stays with the respective BAs. Is that right?
That's correct, and I think he asked that question like seconds before I said that during the presentation. But if there's still a further question on that, I'm more than willing to dive into more details there. Any other questions? And you don't have to have questions now. If you do have questions later, you'll see on the screen. Max was nice enough to put his email address out there, so all of you can send email to Max and ask him all the questions that you may have about anything whatsoever.
So I had a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what are the differences between the Markets Plus and the EDAM in terms of congestion revenue rights and hedging strategies? Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, obviously, both markets are fairly mature, but in terms of the West, the Markets Plus is quite a bit newer. It's going to be evolving with, again, not necessarily proximity, but can you talk a little bit about the differences of those two markets in terms of congestion revenue rights and hedging strategies?
Yeah, I'll take the first part, and TJ, if you want to fill in the gaps, because I think there's been a lot of filings and a lot of market discussion related to transmission rights and congestion rents and how those congestion rents are allocated back. And I think EDAM has made a significant efforts to address some of those concerns. But I can say, that's an area where SPP has been very clear from the start as far as those with point-to-point transmission and network transmission will be directly allocated congestion rents for that POR, for that point of receipt, that injection point to the withdrawal point, if there is implied congestion. Now, I think the allocation works a little differently with EDAM, and I'll let TJ elaborate on that if he wants, but they are going to be making some changes, but it won't be in time for the market launch. I think that there were concerns brought forward by PowerX related to that, and not fully versed on it, but they would allocate differently than what SPP has. Whereas SPP, if you have implied congestion, you will get the rents associated that. If you have transmission rights, you will get the congestion rents associated with that if there is congestion between your point of receipt and point of delivery.
Okay. I see a question. What is the impact of WSPP on these two markets, if any? I don't know if there would be any difference between the impact of the WSPP on those two markets. Max, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, WSPP is, obviously the master agreement is widely used across the West. If anything, you might see a broadening of product or, capacity terms to accommodate RAP, to accommodate the flex ramp that I talked about. But no, I think that, again, a day-ahead market does not change the fact that you can transact bilaterally forward, which was what a lot of folks use WSPP for. I think you'll see a lot of WSPP firm Schedule C contracts being used to meet capacity obligations, at least in the interim. So no, I don't think that it necessarily directly impacts. It might just, again, continue to evolve, but as an industry group, it proved a very valuable construct for contracting bilaterally in the West, and that's just going to continue into the future.
Got a few minutes left if anyone else has any questions.
So I do have one more. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, can I go? Is a question?
Yeah.
This is Yuri from Rayuan. Was kind of curious. I know in the East during market expansion, there was an issue of so-called allocation, trying to put some brakes on market expansion and have historic flows which were allocated, and then post real time, there was process to essentially refund entity which used more than they were entitled to, the so-called flow gate allocation process. It was predominantly between MISO, PGM, and SPP. I was kind of curious if CAISO and SPP are looking to implement something similar to kind of have historic market flow and allocate based on that, and also coordination process between market and non-market entities. How is it going to be able to intervene for reliability purposes? TLR is the only option, or is there other market mechanisms in place?
Yeah, so both these markets are voluntary markets, and so for the individuals that join them, they are agreeing to the rules within that market, and for those that stay out, the impacts are viewed to be minimal of those markets going live. When it comes to the running of the past markets and doing compensation based off of that, I have not heard of that happening here in the West. I'd be surprised if we did. But there is always, at least I know in EDAM, and Max can speak to Markets Plus, during that settlement process, there is always the capability of finding some sort of a flaw or a problem with the way the market ran on a particular day or for a particular period, and resettling it. But that would be once the market goes live.
Yeah, I think that I think the first part of your question, Yuri, is around seams, and that is really the next area that's being tackled. SPP recently put out a document about that, how seams will be handled between those markets. And second part of your question, reliability function still resides with the BAs, not the day-ahead market operator. It gets a little confusing because the reliability coordinator is the SPP in some regions, most of which overlap with the Markets Plus. And CAISO, I think, is also expanding. We're used to have a reliability coordinator that was separate from that. But balancing authorities will still retain that reliability function. Again, that is a core difference between a day-ahead market and a fully integrated RTO.
I can speak to the SPP MISO issue if it's helpful.
Sure.
So the SPP and MISO and even PJM, right? But you're trying to go to a flow-based model from a contract-based model. And especially at the seams, you're still working more with contracts. And so the flows will essentially fill up the transmission system. And that's the problem with the allocation. So when you do the financial transmission rights allocation, what you're trying to do is allocate essentially the space on the network. And if someone is just flowing on the network because that's the nature of electricity, then they can use space that was allocated to someone else. And that's why the FTR allocation is a big deal, right? Because you want to make sure that you're only allocating the space that's actually there. PJM, the other difference is that you can ask for options or obligations. Most of the FTR markets are obligations because it financially fills your pot. But if you wanted to go to an option model, you can essentially guarantee that you'll get money, whether the power flows, right to left or left to right. But then there's many fewer options that can be allocated. And again, it's back to the concept that you can't allocate more space on the transmission system than is available. And then if you get these inadvertent flows, that'll eat that up. And so I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Laura.
And actually, that points out something that I have always appreciated about GridSme is that we do have subject matter experts here who know every nuance about every conversation. And so we appreciate you chiming in there, Laura. I show 2 minutes left in this webinar, and it says that we answered Michael's question, so he had nothing else. All right.
Let's use those last few minutes to go back to the first few slides, TJ, to get a vote from our. We kind of skimmed over that, but to share, folks, I tried to get my profile picture to look like TJ's, and I asked Copilot to take my picture and use the similar format as TJ's. What it instead did was it made me it made me a more like TJ, really. So I guess
twins.
It's never a bad thing. It's never a bad thing to be more like
it
TJ.
made my beard look a lot more impressive. I'll say that. But
well, no, I'd say you got a pretty impressive beard in the stock photo there, or the headshot.
Yeah. What do folks think? Yeah, we'll get a vote. We'll get a vote after this. But yeah, we kind of glossed over that in the beginning, but it was a debate of which slide to use, so we decided to throw both in and see what the audience wanted.
All right, well, thank you all. As mentioned before, this last slide here, oh, never mind, you're not going to see the last slide. The last slide there has Max's email address on it. Feel free to reach out to him with any questions, and he'll get you either the question answered or get the right SME on the line to get the question answered.
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us. The recording will be available on YouTube in the next few days. And yeah, our next webinar will be on March 26th. We'll be talking about project management fundamentals, and I will drop the registration link in the chat. So we hope to see everybody there. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope everybody has a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice job.